Hey, everybody, it is episode 15 of the Huddle. You know what we're going to talk about this week? We're going to talk about sports and COVID. We're going to talk about sports and a pandemic. We're going to talk about sports and geopolitics. We're going to talk about Atlanta, Denver, Tokyo. Let's play ball. Hey, everybody, we're back for this week's edition of the Huddle. This is actually number 15 and a little inside baseball. When we decided to put together the Huddle, we wanted to combine the beauty of sports, politics, inner circle analysis, and nothing better than what's happening with Major League Baseball. Brendan, Major League Baseball, there's an exhibition game, which means it doesn't count, in Atlanta, Georgia, that the MLB has decided can't happen because of voting right restrictions, the way you interpret this law. What's puzzling to me is that there'll be 81 other games played in Georgia, which are okay. But this one exhibition game, 3 strikes, you're out. Explain to us, what is MLB thinking? What is Major League Baseball thinking?
Mark, we love the politics of sports. We use it as a metaphor often, but what better field to battle on for the politicos than the baseball diamond? And of course, the canceling of the All-Star game in Atlanta is about as silly as it comes when it talks about symbolism versus real world engagement. Even Stacey Abrams, the Democrat who's championing so much for the people of Georgia, has said that the economic loss of this symbolic cancellation is a disaster for her state. This idea of taking the All-Star game out of Georgia, when you pointed out there are going to be 80 other games already played in this same ballpark, in this same set of, in the same geography, it's raising a question whether some of these symbolic moves are about as absurd as the symbolic first pitches that we see presidents and governors and celebrities so often throw out.
I've considered myself a progressive libertarian, or maybe I'm a libertarian progressive. I don't know. Like, listen, I'm all for equal rights and advancements. Like, I think we made a lot of strides. I think we got a lot more strides to do. But this, to me, just seems like the peak level of wokeness. I fully don't understand it. I don't know what MLB is thinking. The idea that Denver is somehow better, like somehow the rules in Colorado are better, I have no idea. What I'm finding really interesting is what corporate America is thinking. They're suddenly moving wherever the tide is going. And I don't see how this is going to get any better. If they're going to move a baseball game, an exhibition baseball game, who knows what else you're going to enter. And you got to consider, as we've been talking about here in the Huddle, I think we're entering a crazy period of hyperpolitics. I'm fully convinced now that Republicans are going to take over the House 100%. Like, I was waffling on that. I think that's going to happen. I think Joe Biden is done in one term. In 2024, you're going to have 60 candidates running for office. And the politics are only crazier. Somehow, MLB, corporate America being cute by agreeing to move this baseball game is somehow going to appease this woke mob. They've got another thing coming. I think we've only seen the start of wokeness.
I said last week, nobody knows how to complain like the Americans. And I think this is a perfect example. I'm reminded of a project I worked on years ago. The American Counseling Association was notoriously on the edge about holding their annual meeting in Nashville after Tennessee had passed a law saying that counselors could discriminate against someone based on their sexual preference. It was a controversial law, but it was right at the center of this association. So it was really a bullseye issue when it came to why they might move their annual meeting. This voting law has nothing to do with baseball. And so the question is, are we going to play sports in any jurisdictions where that we don't agree with their politics? What are we going to say that we don't play the Super Bowl in certain places? Are we going to say that we don't do all kinds of lines in the sand now? And of course, the big Republican talking point at the moment, you need an ID to go pick up your baseball tickets, but they don't want you to need an ID to go vote. So obviously there's a big debate, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. This kind of debate is going to be exactly why this midterm election is going to be very interesting for the Republicans. And of course, the race for the White House, as we see 20, 30, 40 people jump into the race in 2024. Oh boy, get excited.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't see how this really stops. Like, I think it's also a combination of like energy. There's still like pent up craziness from the Trump era, right? That hasn't fully exacerbated. Everything is still hyper politics. We're still in this pandemic mode where we're stuck at home, where we've got more attention to pay to these kind of second and third tier issues. But to really think that this is a pressing issue of where an exhibition baseball game is played, I don't know. I mean, I really think it's crazy. I think this is going to come back to hurt the Democrats. And I'm also warning the corporate America, like, when are you going to stop with this stuff? I mean, don't you have other things better to do than worry about an exhibition baseball game? And if you think this is a problem, wait until the Beijing Winter Games. Hello? Do we know what's going on in China? If you think Atlanta, Georgia's a problem, we got a problem in China.
That's exactly, of course, the thing that we need to look at is that we're still willing to quite literally play ball with countries that are not even just accused human rights violators, but confirmed human rights violators. And at the same time, we're complaining because in a constitutional way, this law changed in Georgia and people disagree with it. Now, of course, there are other laws around the country that are still being hotly debated. There's a trans rights law happening in Arkansas that now has all kinds of people asking whether or not we should be doing things. I heard I think it's a cycling race that was going to be in Arkansas that people, we don't agree with this. We don't agree with this. Where does the line fall? And let's not forget, there's still a global pandemic out there. Is sports really the hill we want to die on? Of course, it's enjoyable. Of course, it's important for health and for entertainment. But is this really the moment when we want to turn ourselves upside down about it? Of course, we will remember at the beginning of the pandemic, LeBron James got himself in hot water for protesting the NBA's stances on basketball in Hong Kong. Where does it end?
I have no idea. Listen, I mean, I'm not the most likable guy in the world. I'm pretty curmudgeon. If I didn't engage with people or brands that I didn't agree with, I would be stuck at home all day just eating applesauce and mac and cheese. I somehow find a way to get out and deal with the world. I mean, settle down. Like, I love politics. I do it professionally, but I got to say, there is too much politics. Let's play ball. Let's get back to simple Cracker Jack and baseball games. What do you say about that, brother? Well, let's go out to the ballpark. Are you ready?
Speaking of the ballpark, though, a recent study thought when it was commissioned, I am told, was going to prove that people were excited to get back out to the ballpark, excited because they wanted to be part of live sports. As it turns out, there's still a lot of concern about health and safety, much more than there is about wanting to get back to see a baseball game in person. So these results are a little bit surprising, but we see it no further than right here in Washington when the Washington Nationals had their opening day game. Famously, after winning the World Series in 2019, this was going to be the big return to the ballpark. Sorry, COVID.
Well, COVID, it's like contagious or something. I mean, that story is interesting. In the north of the border, where the NHL has created this semi-bubble experience, the Vancouver Canucks, 18 players, 3 coaches, boom, COVID. Once again, hello, it's contagious. All I know is if you're around other people, there's a chance you can get COVID. So if you're going to go to the ballpark, there's a chance you can get COVID. Can we talk about the Texas Rangers? Apparently, they let in nearly 90% of their capacity for an opening ball game. I can't see how this is going to be a disaster in a few weeks' time. Like, hello? Am I missing something? I don't know.
And everything comes full circle because at that opening game, the only person who maybe wasn't in that stadium, Governor Greg Abbott, who said he refused to throw out the ceremonial first pitch because he was ticked off that they canceled the All-Star game in Georgia. All of it's connected, Mark. This is the politics of sports and the sports of politics. You know, I think that this is the real question that it's going to all zero in on our big topic of today, the Olympics. We've got 60 to 70,000 athletes, trainers. There might not be foreign spectators, but there is a big train headed for Tokyo when it comes to this sport. Is this going to be the super spreader event heard around the world? Too early to tell, but it might be.
I think you're going to have 130 athletes from 130 countries. There's already a small outbreak happening of COVID-19 in Okinawa, Japan, which hasn't happened for months. I don't know. Listen, I love sports. I love all this. But in some ways, I think these kind of multinational global sporting events, it's a bit of a luxury. I feel terrible for Japan. And I think it was really helpful, though, to bring in an expert. We're going to talk with Melanie Brock. She has worked in Japan her professional career for, I'd say, well over 30 years. She's an Australian. She has been tied in with the Australian-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce in Japan. She knows the Indo-Pacific, the Japanese-Australian relationship better than anybody else I know. And she's going to give us a unique perspective on what we should be paying attention to as the Summer Games approach.
Yeah, it's excellent to call in, as they say, phone a friend on this one, because we need somebody who can help us analyze the ins and outs of just we've talked about vaccine passports, about travel and how it all collides with the sports issue. The NCAA did its best to maintain a bubble for the March Madness event. It was not without consequence. There were a number of teams that felt the brunt of COVID hit them, knocking them out of the tournament. And so the question is, what will the Olympics do? Because it's not going to occur without them catching cases right there in the locker room.
Well, and as we talk about teams stepping out, as we recorded this, there's news breaking that the North Korean Olympic team will not be sending athletes to Tokyo over COVID fear. Who knows how there's obviously a backstory there, but will there be other teams, other nations that won't send their athletes? I don't know. I mean, this whole thing is very interesting. I don't really have a good answer. I think taking a break is probably I don't know. Anyways, we can edit all that nonsense out.
Yeah. Let's take a look at our conversation from last week with Melanie, coming to us live from Sydney, Australia. It's great that we've got our first international guest here on the Huddle. Let's take a look.
We are here with Melanie Brock, who is, I think, presently in Sydney, Australia, which is pretty exciting. This is our first international broadcast. 3 quick points about Melanie. Former Australian diplomat, living full-time in Tokyo, Japan, working at the intersection of business, politics, hospitality. Also a member of the World 20. What was that? The World 20, the international.
Oh, yeah, under the G20. Yep.
Yeah, and you're also a global ambassador to Advance, which is a project to help with foreigners, well, I guess not foreigners, Australians living overseas. So
the diaspora of Australia living overseas.
There you go. That's a better talking point. So Melanie, welcome to the Huddle. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So what's interesting, I don't know, you're fresh from quarantine. Sydney. You left, you flew from Tokyo and you were in Sydney and you had to quarantine for 14 days. And we were chatting a little bit about that off camera. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
It's very hard at the moment to get into Australia. The planes are running at about 10% capacity. I think there were 28 people on my Japan Airlines flight coming in 2 weeks ago, and you are immediately processed and you have to have a negative COVID test before you fly, and then you arrive and you're taken to a hotel room where you will stay for 2 weeks. And the luck of the draw meant that I had a room with a open window, which made all the difference for me, because you physically can't go outside for 14 days. And you're tested twice for COVID, and then it costs you $3,000. So I'm assuming there's a bill coming. Actually, don't send the bill. And then you leave. And having come from Japan, where, for the last year, more than a year actually, we've worn masks everywhere, literally. I don't take the rubbish downstairs without putting a mask on. People don't jump into the lift in your building without, if they've forgotten their mask, they'll go back and get it. So Japan's been so masked up for the whole period of time. And then I could look out the window while I was in quarantine. I could see that people weren't wearing masks, and it just felt so unusual. And then Queensland, a state in Australia, had one case or two cases of community transmission. And that's now turned into what they call here a cluster, which is, I think, 6 people. And they're very quick to do contact tracing. So within seconds, the system closes down, and there's a 3-day lockdown just to close those 5 cases off. So it's quite surreal. It's quite surreal.
It is super impressive. We were talking, here in the U.S., it is completely madness. We're still losing close to 700 people a day to death. I don't know. It's amazing that Australia's taking these steps. It's a real testament. I have no idea what's going to happen in the U.S. People are getting vaccinated, but we're not taking this nowhere near as seriously as you all are.
Well, just the vaccination in Australia hasn't really kicked off yet. The government committed to some fairly high targets, but the other thing is that for coming from a country where the vaccination program won't see people vaccinated by probably February next year, in spite of the Olympics coming, with no cases other than 5 in Australia, I'm not so sure that the whole world does need to be vaccinated here yet, but there's a great anxiety that's been built up around the record of having been able to virtually eradicate COVID from their world. So it's very hard to get a sense of what you should be doing, primarily because it's just made the whole world so much smaller and focus on its own territories, hasn't it?
You raise a great point about prioritizing areas when you've only got 5 cases in a whole state in Australia, that there's certainly a lower risk factor. I could go out on the street corner outside my house and probably find cases in an hour. And so going back to Japan, though, you mentioned about wearing masks. Now, this is a culture that's traditionally been very adherent to rules. And when, they've worn masks during other pandemics and things like this. How did you find it in Japan when it came to trying to come with the measures that were going to help prepare to stop the spread of the infection? Were people on board to
I've been thinking
or not?
Oh, people are, and to your point, yes, the Japanese commitment to compliance is remarkable compared to where I was born. This country, I went to the theatre last night and the announcement was masks are recommended but not mandatory. And I looked and I thought I had one on because I just felt that I should with that type of instruction. But there were probably 5 people in a room of 100 that did, and in Japan, you don't have to say that they're mandatory. You have to say that they're required, and people will by that, understanding. A lot has been said about Japan's sort of hand hygiene or their compliance or their capacity to sort of, just trundle along with the orders and the rules of the day. But I still think there's there is that social cohesion that doesn't exist in some other places. I think that's definitely the case. And, my 3-year-old granddaughter will come into the house and she's already pressed the lift with her elbow or, the back of her knuckles. She won't touch with her fingers. She walks straight in the house, does the sanitisation, goes and washes her hands. She's probably got better hygiene than most of the people I know in Australia. But so has that helped? Totally. Are the people now at a point where they're probably looking for greater leadership? Yes. Are they frightened, therefore, about what the impact of the Olympics might be on, say, another wave? Currently just at the tip end of the 3rd wave. Well, are we going to have a hard 4th wave? So, are the young people complying all the time? No. Is there anger about some of the measures that have been placed on some parts of the economy and not others? Yes. Has there been support being provided to the average person? Not a lot. So there's a great deal of angst, I think, irrespective of the fact that the Japanese are far more likely to sort of comply. So complying doesn't mean always acceptance.
Well, the reason we actually want to have you on, obviously, because you're a fascinating guest, and I think because your experience I find really interesting as a diplomat. You've also worked in business, your understanding of Japan, Indo-Pacific, geopolitics. I mean, you are, in a full demand, spokesman. So this is super interesting. I want to go back to 2019, the Rugby World Cup, which came to Japan. It was almost a precursor to hosting the Olympics, and really, they played games throughout the country, and just getting excited for the Olympics. Now it's hard to remember that there was so much excitement. And even the Rugby World Cup did a marvelous job. Can you talk about that experience?
Sure. And I should correct you. I only ever worked at the embassy. I'm not a diplomat, but I do like to think myself as very diplomatic, even though I'm not.
You're not a diplomat.
But in any case,
you're a spy then. You worked at Pine Gap. Anyways.
I had exactly. But the Rugby World Cup was fascinating. And
actually, there's no way you were a diplomat. Further respect, that's right. There's no way you were a diplomat. Anyways, go ahead.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine? They'd be like, whoa. But the Rugby World Cup was terrific for Japan. And it was interesting, way back when it was decided, it was seen exactly as that precursor. It was the sort of a practice event in many ways for what was going to be the biggest, show in town. Having said that, a lot of people bought into the Rugby World Cup much more than they ever bought into the Tokyo Olympics, primarily because of the great decision by whoever to hold the games across Japan. Now, your great country has terrific economic and business units like right across the country, right? You have incredible, your GDP is spread. It's not just so focused in one town or one city, right. Whereas Tokyo is really the central engine for everything, and it gets everything. And Brendan, I think to your point earlier, it's the one that bids, it gets the support, everybody focuses on Tokyo. But you've got a huge population living in regional Japan that feels that they haven't really been looked after for some time, and it's quite depressed economically, and I'd say otherwise. Incomes are very low. Annual income for farmers, for example, can be like $20,000 or something. It's ludicrous. And their political system hasn't necessarily meant that representation from the regional areas of Japan gets them much in the end. So the Rugby World Cup comes in and says, right, we're going to have matches right across the country, from Kyushu right up to Hokkaido. And I think that just, obviously a lot of the money flowed back into Tokyo because that's where corporations and government are based. But it was a terrific buy-in by regional government and local sporting associations and sponsors putting up, events and what have you. So all this focus on it being a precursor. Of course, now we know that it was like the last major fantastic event for Japan, or for the world potentially in terms of sporting engagement. But it was just such a fantastic regional effort. And when Japan started to win, that was the icing on the cake. And when they started to win really well and beat the likes of Ireland and then Scotland, it was just like we were on fire. And so then I think people started to say, wow, is this the focus that might come on our country with the Olympics? I feel the Olympics did better after the Rugby World Cup had been so successful, primarily because people were like, oh, whoa, I'm up for this. So it was a really great time. And just to see, dads at the grounds with kids and, to see the whole buy-in from the community was really quite fantastic. People who don't even know what rugby is and don't care, Well,
yes, sport can be a really interesting way to kind of bring different communities together, different folks, right? Multi-generational aspects.
Totally.
That's why I think they're so important. That's why I even, as a country here in the U.S., I think it's super important that the Olympics happen, just because the last 4 years have been so crazy. I feel like the Americans want the Olympics to happen, including some of our corporate broadcasters. So what is the general sense? What is the mood? Are the Olympics going to happen? They'll
happen. They'll happen. They'll totally happen. But not because the average Japanese person says, oh, we really want them to happen. It's because of corporates and because of decisions made in Switzerland for and on behalf of Japan, I guess. People don't want Japan to not benefit from, the greatest sporting event in the world, obviously. But does the average person really, are they waiting thinking, oh, now it's April, only 3 months to the Olympics? I'm not so sure. Are they frightened about what the impact of 70,000 athletes and officials might do to the COVID numbers? Yes. Were they that into the Olympics at the start? Maybe not, because of that regional angle. It was seen as much a very big thing for Tokyo, and once again, not for Japan. But does everybody love the Olympics? And when somebody who you didn't think could get a medal does, or that last battle for a bronze, and then someone dips out in the story of their, of course you do. So I think people will get into it, but in a different way.
Do you just?
I think they'll have a.
Go ahead. Sorry. Now, do you see people going to the games? Like, do you think we're going to see people in the stands, like, cheering on the athletes?
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. And, I think the decisions that are being made at the time about no foreign visitors, reduced official numbers, social distancing, etc., all of those things will set in train a sense of security around the management of it. That make people think, okay, well, I'd love to take my grandchild to the water polo or whatever, and it's close to where you are. Right. Now you've probably got another chance at getting the tickets. As we get closer and people feel more comfort, then I think people will be totally up for it, just because it'll be that spectacle that they might not have been able to see in person.
What's your sense about Australia? I mean, Australia is a great sporting nation. I feel like Aussies will compete on anything, anywhere, anytime. They seem like they're very into sporting events, which is great, and they have great athletes.
And we're very good at it.
I know, as I said, you're very good at it. You have great athletes.
No, I'm just making a statement.
I know. Do you anticipate, is Australia excited? Like, I mean, are athletes training, getting ready for it? Is there buzz?
Oh, totally. Yep. Yeah. And yesterday in Sydney, I saw on the news that they'd announced the new uniforms. And the design is an incredible Indigenous design that's been incorporated into the ASICS, uniform. And I think that created a bit of buzz. But, people might be just getting over the fact that they're now not to travel to Tokyo. So there'd be quite a few people. Australians love flying around, and they love Japan. I mean, so many Australians visit and love skiing and the food and everything that people love coming to Japan for. So potentially, you've lost a little bit of interest because people were going up for a little while or stuff. But I think, it'll happen. And the athletes, Australia will do well because it's ready for it, it's up for it. The other thing I think that's really important for Japan is the Paralympics. I think the Paralympics is something that the Japanese have focused on delivering properly for some time now. And I'm quite proud of that. I think that's an important shift in the Olympic movement, I think. I don't know, I just sense that there's a real commitment to that.
Back in 2013, during the selection process for these games, I actually was part of a media and film project in Japan. And the candidate cities at the time were Madrid, Istanbul, and Tokyo. And the big selling points for Tokyo were that it was going to be safe, efficient, and clean. And those same tenets take on a new meaning now in the time of COVID, because when you have that many people, it's not safety so far as they were worried about. There was definitely some nationalism thrown around. There's more petty crime in Madrid, but now, it's going to be safe and clean are going to be big efforts that come to the front of mind. Even this last year, they've invested, I think, over $2 billion just to move the games from last year to this year. So there's a lot at stake here, regardless of who's the driving force.
Yeah. I do feel for the regional areas of Japan that were so excited about the Rugby World Cup, saw the benefit that had for their regions, and they were host towns of Olympic visiting teams. And they've done so much work, gearing up their community to welcome Australian fans and the like, and the US teams are the same. Everybody's got this incredible reach. So there's a great deal of loss that will be experienced by people, no doubt. But the clean games, as you say, will take on a new angle, probably for a lot of people at the moment, and there are quite a few journalists have written about this. The clean angle is going to be impacted by the visiting number of athletes, and the no amount of measures put in place will allow Japan to be safe from COVID. That number of people, altogether for a short period of time in summer, it's going to be intense. But it's sort of going to go ahead now. And I think that Japan has reckoned with and understood that it's a different type of benefit that will come as a result of it. I feel for corporates too. They had to wait for this announcement that the games are going ahead and that the visitors won't be coming, and then they have to change all their hospitality plans and their promotion plans and stuff. So they haven't been able to get any bang for their buck for ages, and now here it is, it's upon us and everything. So I think the whole games will take on a different angle. I think that I can't specifically remember the theme, but I do remember it was something like a unifying, or Japan would be a symbol for a unified post-COVID world. Well, what does that mean anyway when so many people are still dying? Unification is one thing, but, can't we just focus on public health and access to the vaccine in poorer countries and the like? So I think if you start talking about the money that's been spent, people become quite angry. And I think that they're sort of resigned to it, which is a terrible way to be. But I think it's what, in many cases, just happens. People are resigned to what is going to take place.
Well, I want to add another layer to that, because maddeningly, we're just over 300 days away from Beijing hosting the Winter Games, which is crazy because there's no snow. But anyways, Beijing's going to host the Winter Games. Is there whispers, around the Quad, around the diplomatic community, around government saying, hey, Tokyo, you've got to do this, just for the pride, and because Japan versus China, is that being talked about?
I see reports of that all the time. You see that, a journalist's angle will be that, Japan can't not hold the games because Beijing wants to hold it, or it'll show Japan up and the like. I don't think that's, who knows? I'm not in the rooms of the IOC, discussion halls and the like. I think people want to hold the games for the right reasons, and what those reasons are is, of course, in the Olympic movement, money, power, and broadcasting. So, are they the right reasons for the citizens of Japan in Kyushu? Are they the right reasons for people who are likely to be prone to public health issues because of a great number of people coming in? Probably not. Will they give people a great sense of national pride when somebody wins the medal? Yes. So it's hard to work out in 2021 what will be that defining moment. A lot of people have said to me, oh, when you say that Japanese people aren't getting into the Olympics, is it like everywhere that has the Olympics chosen for its city or bids for it to be held, and they're not excited until the very last minute? There's a lot of talk about how, I hated it because it meant that, the traffic was really bad until it started, and then I loved it, I'm not sensing that same issue now. I think there are much bigger issues at play, but I don't know that I want to show China up by having it. I just think people are resigned to the fact that it's going ahead.
Yeah.
You mentioned the nationalism, and obviously that there will be moments of national pride, and everybody needs a little bit of a win in the COVID world. But this is not going to be the same kind of win for the Americans over Russia like during the 1980s in the Cold War. That I don't think, America is going to beat China, Australia is going to beat China, Japan's going to beat China, and everyone's going to say, well, that makes up for COVID. That it's not quite the same. But let's talk about some of that other soft power that does come from this. After the games in Beijing, there are already games that are set for Paris and for Los Angeles that they were jockeying for. That's another reason why they said we couldn't have the delays further to delay the Tokyo Games another year, that everybody is looking for their next step. What do you think about that there's other ramifications for again, who's looking for their next paycheck and or win?
I think Japan was quite new to sort of corporate and or sporting hospitality when the Rugby World Cup came to town. And so the whole notion of going to an event, then going to the match, and then coming back to the sort of post-event, like a big, bash, was fantastic for people because it was really...
a reminder that Tokyo had hosted the games in 1964. And then when the games were in Beijing the previous time, that was one of the first games back in mainland Asia. So this is a big deal for them to be back in Japan.
But you see, there's a range of industries that Japan probably didn't realize it might benefit from. So, for example, after rugby, the baseball and or the soccer teams and other sporting organisations realise that there's a new angle to sport. It's sport for business, sport for empowerment, sport for politics, sport for all sorts of different things. And I'm not suggesting in any way that Japan was underdeveloped in its understanding of that taking place overseas, but it hadn't seen it back on its own sort of turf. And so I think the Olympics would have been that next step for sponsors to sort of benefit from, and so there was a whole range of people who were bringing new expertise to Japan around sporting hospitality events and the like, event management, stadia build, infrastructure related to that, social media and the benefit of it. So there's a loss there in terms of that new industry development or that new business development, I think, that we won't get another chance at for a while. But I don't think in this COVID world where you're experiencing, as you say, over 700 people dying every day, and France has just gone into lockdown, and all of the other countries that are experiencing this, nobody's going to have the same expectations that Japan is going to wow them. I think if Japan is able to do this in a fair and equitable manner, that people will recognise that in itself was an incredible commitment and delivery in a COVID world. And so what we wanted for Japan is very different to what we will get a chance to show. And you would know, Brendan, from when you were doing those early films and the like, about what people thought people would want to see when they came to Japan, the stories of the robots showing them onto the trains and you hear stories about people who've developed small Airbnb rooms with a view to the foreign visitors coming for the Olympics, people learning language, all the taxi drivers in Tokyo were learning how to speak English. I mean, these are old blokes, and there they were committed to learning the language of the visitor, all of that incredibly mindful Japanese sort of hospitality, approach is now like, well, what do I do now? But I'm sure the view from outside will be, but you still did it, and as I say, there are a lot of people who are against the whole notion that it will continue. A lot of people believe it will bring the fourth wave and that there will be significant deaths in Japan. So there are opposing views.
I'm reading here, there's 11,000 athletes from 200 countries. That seems, I wouldn't want to go anywhere near 11,000 people anywhere. As we close out, I want to, we're 10 years out from the tsunami in Fukushima, and you wrote a really powerful column about lessons from the tsunami. And you've been visiting this town, Tohoku, for, I think, the last 10 years. Every year, almost as an anniversary, as a pilgrimage. 20,000 deaths. I remember watching this live, this wall of water across the world, on the other side of the planet, and just the destruction. Even thinking about it now, it's just unbelievable. Can you talk about what we should learn from the tsunami, and like, what are we missing? And as people from around the world, what is there stuff we can do to help certain parts of Japan?
It's very kind. I think the notion, or the idea was that the Olympics would help, in some way, that, Fukushima would have a certain bunch of people visiting their places, host towns, and that you would bring people to the region and what have you. And you'll see, of course, that the Olympic flame, the whole ceremony started in Fukushima. Right. And I think that in itself tells you a lot about the strong commitment by the government, by the people of Japan to continue to support. I think it also shows a lot about resilience of the Japanese people. That, you know, and it also shows that they resign themselves to things. So their capacity to accept disasters, not accept them, but they live in a natural disaster zone. There's typhoons, floods, earthquakes, of course. It means that they're much better prepared than we are for disaster. So in some ways, I don't know whether they're a little bit prepared for perhaps the pandemic in that sense, because their capacity to understand what this means for the country, you know, was probably quicker because of the last 10 years.
Right.
The infrastructure build in Tohoku has been remarkable. The government, I don't know what the total trillion yen amount is, but basically for that whole strip, there is now a tsunami wall that is quite substantial. What I think, though, is that the next 10 years will be about how you equip people. But back to my comment about regional Japan, it was a very poor area to start with. And so how do you now say, not business development, but how do you look after people such that now they've got a home, they need to get over what happened? How do you, that soft versus hard infrastructure, mental health support, opportunities for children, opportunities for people to visit Fukushima. In some ways, not having the Olympics means a lot of that's on hold. But I think the 10th anniversary was a time when people looked back at it, at what had happened, and saw that there was still a lot to do. As to what you can do, come and visit. You know, I encourage everybody, when all this awful pandemic has, you know, moved on and we've got a new way of travel or whatever it is that we have, you know, people should come to Tokyo, have the fun bit, and then just go and explore.
I'm ready.
Yeah, it's a great lesson on interconnectedness in a positive way. Obviously, COVID has been the great lesson on global interconnectedness in a negative way. I appreciate all your thoughts, and you know, we look forward to being on the same hemisphere sometime soon.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, I'll be back in May, and you know, we can maybe do one from the Olympics. Do another,
I love it.
Like a view from the. Yeah, that'd be great.
That's a good idea.
Actually, there's a new job for me, broadcasting by Melanie.
There you go.
I love it. There you go. You can use this as your sizzle reel. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Marc, I really enjoyed talking to Melanie Brock. Other than just a fun soul there, I think she is definitely the kind of global mind we appreciate here on this show. We always talk about inner circle analysis, but we have to remember inner circle can mean a really big group of people. And it's amazing that in 2021, we can reach out to her halfway across the world.
Yeah, Melanie Brock's a real pro, a real good friend, good advisor, you know, one of the foremost experts, and certainly somebody I lean on a lot to get a better understanding of what's happening in Australia, Japan, the Indo-Pacific, and our first international guest. What a real treat. Hopefully, she promised she would take us out for ramen and cocktails in Tokyo. So hopefully we can get over there, take her up on that.
We're going to have a lot to keep track of as we head into the summer to see just how these Tokyo games do come together. I know that there are still some people who are skeptical that even as we get this close, it just might not happen.
Yeah, as we said, it's hard to see, you know, athletes from 130 countries coming in to play sports for a few weeks. The pressure, as Melanie suggested, it didn't seem like there was a lot of excitement outside of Tokyo and outside of the senior leadership. So it's going to be really interesting if we forge ahead. Certainly our friends at Comcast up there in Philadelphia, NBC Sports, are keen to see something happen, but I don't know. We'll see.
The question, of course, is that fourth wave coming? That is definitely on the minds of people around the world. We've talked about Europe quite a bit. Now with Canada locking down parts of their country as well, it is definitely going to be an issue to see what Japan thinks is the right move, as well as all those participant nations.
Yeah, and certainly I think it's going to be interesting as well, as we're going to hear more and more talk about vaccine passports. We touched a lot about on that last week, previous episode. But certainly the requirements of, you know, do you have to get vaccinated to even compete? Will that be a requirement to get into the country? Will athletes all want to take it? I don't know. There's a lot of big challenges ahead. I'm hopeful. I love the Olympics, but I don't know. It's pretty daunting. And this topic certainly will be front and center. What's interesting, one of the first state visits that the Joe Biden administration will host, Prime Minister Suga from Japan is scheduled to visit the White House on Friday, April 16th. Certainly there'll be a lot of talk about U.S.-Japanese relations, Indo-Pacific geopolitics, and the Olympics will be front and center. So, this will be a developing topic. Hopefully we'll have more insights as the Japanese leadership descends on Washington, D.C.
Don't worry, huddlers. We will keep you posted as these Olympic Games head towards Tokyo. Well, Mark, one last thing. You know what time it is. Mark, who do you want in your huddle this week? I hope you've got someone fun.
So I'm going with Vladimir Putin. Now, why do you say Vladimir Putin? Well, he is someone who has no time for nonsense, no time for wokeness, no time for hyperpolitics. He just signed a law allowing him to stay into office until 2036. I can't even do the math on that. That is like nearly to the middle of this century. Oh my gosh, Vladimir Putin, 2036. What could go wrong with that? So Vlad, you're in my huddle.
And let's not forget, he was recently named the sexiest man in Russia. So what could go wrong with that?
Good for him. Maybe maybe we can do a dacha interview at his Sochi compound. Take the huddle on the road. What do you think?
I would certainly love to get the huddle in Russia.
Brendan, who do you have as your pick for this week in your huddle?
Well, Mark, I've got 4 folks who I'm going to bring into my huddle this week. You may not know their names now, but the importance of these 4 people, they are the all-civilian crew for the Inspiration 4 mission that has been revealed, taking civilians into space. I'm very excited, as usual, about the developments of how we're going to use science and innovation to further how we survive on this planet and beyond. And so it's exciting to see our continued drive to take people and shoot for the moon, as they say. So this is going to be the big SpaceX mission and a big path to see what our future among the stars might be. These 4 folks are going to be pioneers that maybe one day will stand in the annals of history along Neil Armstrong and John Glenn.
Now, it's super exciting to see the SpaceX program advance, and certainly as we continue to liberate and open up more parts of the solar system to civilian space travel. Super exciting.
Well, Mark, until we get to Russia or the space station, I think that's enough for one week. We will see you again next week here on The Huddle. Have a good one.